We are back, and so let's take a look at the side concepts of mercantilism. What happened because mercantilism existed? First, colonists were encouraged to have a thriving agriculture. So, when our country first started, most people were farmers. The urbanization of of that was going on in Europe wasn't happening here to the same degree. That wouldn't come until about 1800. Sea power was necessary for foreign markets, so shipbuilding became very important as well. There were all kinds of taxes imposed to encourage raw materials to get to the mother country and for raw material, finished goods to come back to this country as a more expensive item. Colonies would provide a captive market that would be a source for raw materials and a place to dump their manufactured goods, and they would only be allowed to buy off the mother country. Trade was seen as a zero-sum game, which basically means that a nation can only gain in international trade at the expense of other nations. There was no win-win. It was we win, you lose. A large population was needed as a domestic labor force, so people were encouraged to have lots of babies. Luxury items were avoided, so during this time period, people would wear simple dress wear and might have 2 or 3 articles of clothing for the week. They had their Sunday best, and then they had their other 2 articles of clothing that they would wear, and they would alternate days. So they would wear Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and then the Sunday best. And when they wore out one of their articles of clothes, they would buy a new Sunday best set of clothing, and the process would just continue. State action was needed to regulate and enforce all policies. So you had trade monopolies like the East India Company and the Jamestown Tobacco Company and the Virginia Land Company. Now, this was promoted actually by a French economist named Jean-Baptiste Colbert. Looks like Jean-Baptiste Colbert, but it's Jean-Baptiste Colbert. And he lived in the 1600s and was very prominent in the mid-1600s. Mercantilism is also known as Colbertism because of him. And he was a bullionist. And a bullionist means somebody who believes that currency needs to be based on gold and silver. He believed that the 4 most important professions were agriculture, trade, army, and the navy. He believed in a uniform set of weights and measures. Each country kind of had their own weight and measure system. Ironically, it's his dream. It didn't happen in his lifetime, but a century later, the metric system gets developed out of his ideals of a uniform weight and measure system. He supported a mandatory labor on national roads, so all people had to work on the national road. He did not believe in a road toll, and he was one of the first in the world to really promote that. Today we take it for granted you can just hop on the road and go, and we complain about the West Virginia Turnpike having tolls, but at one time, almost every road in Europe had a toll on it. It's hard for us to envision that today, but it did. He favored a large population, and he believed that all men with more than 10 children should be exempt from paying taxes because their children were out making their way in the world, and they were paying taxes, which, why were they paying taxes? Because he favored child labor. Now, who benefited from this? Monarchs, merchant capitalists, and joint stock companies. Monarchs are kings and queens. They got richer and more powerful. Merchant capitalists were people who were involved. These are your conquistadors of the Spanish and the Portuguese, but later on, these are the people running your joint stock companies for the French and the English. And joint stock companies obviously got wealthy off of this as well. And government officials who collected taxes were kind of guilty of siphoning off some of those taxes for themselves. So they got wealthy as well, which is why American colonists really did not like tax collectors. And a lot of them ended up getting tarred and feathered during the American Revolution. Now, at the time of the American Revolution, at this same time, you're going to have a man named Adam Smith come into respect. And he's going to develop the modern idea of capitalism in business. First off, you got to understand today there are four main type of economic systems. I'm going to do this briefly. You have a traditional system. Feudalism is an example of a traditional economy where your family lineage determines who gets what and why. You know, the landlord's son becomes the next lord of the, and the peasants' kids were all peasants, and you were born into that. That was the way it was under feudalism. And then today there are two major types of economies. One is a command economy, often called communism. You see this in North Korea, you see it in China, you see it in Cuba, where the government literally owns everything. And then you have a market economy. This is capitalism. And then a lot of countries today have a mixed economy where they're a little bit more involved in the government than capitalism, but they allow capitalist adventures to happen. Now, Adam Smith is the one who came up with the concept of, why is it doing that? I apologize for even saying that. Anyway, Adam Smith is the one who came up with the concept of capitalism. And today we think of him as this master economist, an expert in the economy. Almost every capitalist in the world quotes Adam Smith and his book, The Wealth of Nations. But the truth be told, he was not an economist first. He was a philosopher, and he was also involved in logic. So these two things, logic and philosophy, would influence him. And then he went on a travel, and he looked at the writings of the physiocrats, the French, who were kind of against Colbertism. And he went, you know what? There's something here. And then he expounded on it and came up with the concept of capitalism. He was making a political argument, but he used economics to make his point. And he argued that the wealth of the nation is not the government having the most gold, which went completely against mercantilist theory. He argued that it's not the state's wealth that makes a nation wealthy, it's the people's wealth, the people living within your country. If they're wealthy, then you're wealthy. And if they're not, you're not. And this is going to come into play quite often during the pre-Revolutionary War time period. He also said that the zero game concept, where there's only winners and only losers, that's not the way economics really works. In fact, he said it was a positive sum game. He argued that all economic parties engage into a buying scheme to better themselves. So it kind of worked like this. If you're going to buy something, you're buying something because you expect to be better off by purchasing that thing. For example, if you buy a car, you have now purchased mobility. Okay, some business made the car that your mom and dad drive. And you work hard and you get money. And that money you pay into buying the things you want, like a car or a house. And that feeds businesses like car companies and people who do construction. And so they need to hire people. So they give wages to workers who then are continuing the process by spending for more wealth. And he said this concept is what makes a country wealthy. He saw that goods and services are produced for profitable exchange. People were expecting to get paid. He also argued that the invisible hand, I have no idea again, the invisible hand of the market would naturally guide the economy. And the less government got involved in trying to maintain the economy, the better off the country would be. Because people will naturally seek their own best self-interest. In other words, the market mechanism is self-regulating. The government doesn't need to regulate the economy, according to Adam Smith. Individuals seeking success are driven by self-interest. We call this a profit motive. Think about it. If you're going to go work somewhere like your neighbor's yard, you probably won't paid, right? Then you have the law of supply and demand. People who are free to pursue their self-interest will produce goods and services that others want at prices others are willing to pay. That price where you're willing to do your thing and get paid a certain thing and somebody else is willing to pay that something, to get that something, is called equilibrium. This is where supply and demand meet. And Adam Smith claimed that supply and demand will naturally regulate the economy and that the country will get wealthier by just keeping their distance out of it. He also argued that the law of competition is what compels producers to be increasingly efficient. You know, if you have somebody and they're charging a high price for something, somebody's going to come along and say, I can make that thing cheaper than they can, and I'd still make a lot of money if I could just, for example, have a faster factory, or I could open a store where everybody could get to, or some way to make the business better. Adam Smith argued that's exactly what you want. It's the law of competition. He also argued that a social division of labor will maximize the satisfaction of individual wants and needs, okay, given scarce resources. In other words, let people go after whatever they want. And the government should interfere minimally with free and efficient workings of the markets. This is called laissez-faire. Now, it looks like laissez-faire, but it's not. It's laissez-faire. It's a French word. And it means leave things alone. Now, Adam Smith came up with all these ideas right around the time our founding fathers were thinking of how they wanted our government to work. And he is the economist that most influenced them at that time period. And so it's important to understand capitalism. It's important to understand that capitalism branched out of mercantilism, and honestly, mercantilism branched out of feudalism. All right, I hope that helped, and you guys have a wonderful day.